Hi, and welcome to Abnormal Psychology. We're going to be looking at schizophrenia, spectrum, and other psychotic disorders. I'm going to give you a little overview of something that will be one of the journals. I think it's in Journal 5, where I've put 2 videos up with people who themselves have schizophrenia. But one of them, Ellen Sachs, at age 8, Ellen Sachs began to experience hallucinations and fears of being attacked that have accompanied her throughout her life. She understood the importance of not talking openly about what ran through her mind. In fact, she was able to hide her delusional thoughts and hallucinations and maintain top grades throughout college. In graduate school, she experienced a full-blown psychotic episode, of which I think in the video she explains. And for example, believing that someone had infiltrated her research and dancing on the roof of the law library. Now you can imagine that's not going to go over well. And that resulted in her hospitalization and subsequent diagnosis of schizophrenia. Now many of her symptoms persisted even after beginning treatment. During one period, she believed that her therapist had been replaced by an evil person with an identical appearance. In her book, The Center Cannot Hold: My Journey Through Madness, and this was by Sachs in 2007, and it recounts her lifelong struggle with mental illness, describing schizophrenia as a slow fog that becomes thicker over time. Sachs struggles with schizophrenia as well as her experience with forced treatment, resulting in an intense interest in the mental health and in the law. Her doctors had painted a black picture of her future. They believed that she would not complete her degree or be able to hold a job or even get married. However, Sachs did marry, did complete her graduate school, and she is now a professor of law, psychology, and psychiatry at the University of Southern California, where she's also served as the Associate Dean. Now, as I mentioned, I've posted a video of Ellen Sachs speaking about her illness, and it's going to be in the Journal 5, I think is what it will be. Now, let's get started on just schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is among one of the most puzzling and disabling clinical syndromes. Schizophrenia touches every facet of an afflicted person's life. There can be acute episodes of that are characterized by delusions, hallucinations, illogical thinking, incoherent speech, and bizarre behavior. Now, between episodes, people may still be unable to think clearly and may lack appropriate emotional responses to people and events in their lives. So in this video, we're going to look at some of the background history and review the phases and features of schizophrenia. And we'll do this in 2 videos. Let's begin. The clinical features of schizophrenia, historical contributions, concepts of schizophrenia. Now we can start with Emil Kraepelin. And he was the first to describe the syndrome we identify today as schizophrenia. He labeled the disorder dementia parox and believed that it was a disease that developed early in life and follows a progressive, deteriorating course. Now, Eugen Bleuler, he renamed the disorder schizophrenia and believed that it was its course was more variable. He also distinguished between primary symptoms, the 4 A's that he would say were primary symptoms, namely associations, they were more disturbed, affect, which was fairly to very inappropriate, ambivalence in terms of feelings, and autism, this sort of withdrawn into more of a private fantasy world. And then he also looked at secondary symptoms, which were basically hallucinations and delusions. Kurt Schneider distinguished between first-rank symptoms that define the disorder and second-rank symptoms that occur in schizophrenia, but as also in other disorders. Hallucinations and delusions are numbered among first-rank symptoms of schizophrenia. That is, the symptoms of schizophrenia that are central to the diagnosis. The so-called second-rank symptoms are found in other disorders as well. Schneider considered confusion and disturbances in mood to be second-rank symptoms. So Kreplin, Bleuler, and Schneider have each contributed to how we understand schizophrenia in terms of the view and how it's diagnosed using the DSM-5. So when we think in terms of the prevalence and the cost of schizophrenia, according to some of the best estimates, it's only about 1% of the adult Canadian population that can suffer from schizophrenia at some point in their life. So 1% of 37 million is about, 37,000? It's a lot of people. I'm not sure if I've done my math correctly there. So let's look at the phases of schizophrenia. Now, schizophrenia usually develops in late adolescence or early adulthood. Its onset is often abrupt, and it can be gradual. Now, usually the reason at early or later in teens and early adulthood is when the stressors of life start to pressure people more. Now, most of us handle them mostly well, but for some, and it's that diathesis stress model, some may have a predetermination, preset of this is going to happen when there's a trigger, and that might be the trigger. So the period of deterioration precedes an onset of acute symptoms, and this is called the prodromal phase. An acute or active episode involves the emergence of a clear psychotic features. Now, the residual phase is characterized by a level of functioning that was typical of the primordial phase. So if we think in terms of the major features, in terms of how we would determine that, major features of schizophrenia, among the more prominent features of schizophrenia are disorders in the content of thought, so delusions. And a form of thought, that's the thought disorder, that's your form of thought, how you organize your thoughts, if you will, and disorganized speech, as well as the presence of perceptual distortions, and that would be hallucinations, and emotional disturbances. That would include the flattening or inappropriate affect. Flattening of emotional disturbance means you don't react to anything high or low, it's sort of monotone. And the inappropriate affect is instead of sobbing at a funeral, maybe you start laughing. So that's the flattening or inappropriate affect, and also includes grossly disorganized or even canatonic behavior. Now, canatonic is about someone who is experiencing canatosis in schizophrenia is someone who will be frozen in a particularly odd pose and may remain that way for hours. Now we're going to start with, what are the terms, we've heard that there are negative and positive symptoms. So we're going to start with the positive symptoms of schizophrenia, and starting with disturbances in the content of thought. The most common of these are delusions. Delusions are false beliefs that are enduring and they lack any evidence. Therefore, they are delusional. Delusions can take many forms. They can include a delusion of persecution. This is where you might think that, well, the police are out to get me, or there's a person or a group that's out to get me, that somehow I am being targeted. A second type would be delusions of being controlled. And here the belief is that their thoughts, their feelings, and impulses are being controlled by outside forces, perhaps special agents or maybe even the devil. Delusions of grandeur. Well, here the belief is the false impression of one's own importance. Perhaps they're believing that they might be Jesus or that they will save the world. There are other delusions: thought broadcasting, thought insertion, thought withdrawal. There's a lot, but they are all irrational and lacking evidence. Next, we can look at the disorganized speech. Now, while daydreaming or just letting your thoughts wander are normal, otherwise our thoughts are rational, logical, and they're tied together. They're connected. They make sense. The thoughts of people with schizophrenia tend to be much more disorganized, illogical, and more disturbed. This is known as thought disorder, or a breakdown in logical associations between thoughts. Connected to this is what's known as poverty of speech. It's also pretty common. And this is when speech that is coherent, you can hear it, but it's limited and vague. There's little informational value. Somebody may speak like a paragraph of words, but you may not see the connection and the point they're trying to make. Now, some things that are a little less common: neologisms. It's made up words, they have no meaning. Or preservation, or that's the repetition of thoughts and words over and over again. Or what's known as clanging, putting words together because they rhyme or they sound alike, but they don't have any meaning. And blocking. Blocking is the involuntary, abrupt interruption of speech and thought. You can imagine that that would make life very difficult, all of those elements. Now, if we move into what are hallucinations, hallucinations are images perceived without external stimuli. Hallucinations can involve any of our senses: our visual, auditory, somatic, remember that's our body, feeling, gustatory, gustatory is our taste, olfactory is smell, auditory and visual are the most common form of hallucinations. Auditory hallucinations occur about 60 to 80% of the cases and can be voices inside one's head or external from the person. It's experienced as self or as another person in your head, a third person, if you will. They can come in the form of a command, instructions to do things, and harm other people. Well, that makes it more challenging, and that's where it can be appearing more dangerous than, in fact, many people with schizophrenia are. So what are the causes of hallucinations? Well, the causes of hallucinations are not known, but there are speculations. Brain chemistry disturbances, subvocalizations, the meaning your own, or unrecognized self-talk. Not recognizing that the talk that we do to ourselves in our head that's not out loud is in fact us and not a third person. The interconnectedness of our brain may in some way be responsible for this. Currently, there are undetermined causes for hallucinations. Grossly disorganized or catatonic behaviors include examples of childlike silliness to unpredictable agitation. The feature called catatonia is described when a person is unaware of their environment and will remain fixed and in a rigid position, as if playing freezing tag and you've been touched, so you have to freeze in space. And they've been frozen in place, as it were. They can remain in that position, like I said, for minutes or for hours. So that's a basic overview of the positive symptoms. But what about the negative symptoms? What are they? Well, negative symptoms are characterized by the absence of normal behavior. Negative symptoms are more like deficits or behavioral deficiencies, such as, your social skills plummet. You socially withdraw from other people. The flattening affect, the term effect, that is, flat affect is essentially a lack of emotional expression. Your face and your voice don't seem to show excitement when you're excited. They're lacking that normal range of emotional response. The reality may not be no emotional complexity, rather, emotions are not communicating to the outside world, but are experienced still, only internally. Other types of impairments can include hypervigilance, the oversensitivity to stimuli, not being able to filter out or to focus. So that just gives us the first part. Now the second part we're going to look at will be the theoretical perspectives, okay? All right, everybody. We'll see you in part 2. Bye now.